All right. Hi, this is Shannon Miller, and we are doing a quick overview of our Medicaid Basics worksheet for staff, and we thought it might be a good idea to include everybody in this overview. So Medicaid long-term care is different than Medicaid waiver. Medicaid long-term care is basically the qualification criteria for being in a nursing home setting, okay? And this is what this document at the very first page is going over. You have to be a US citizen. You can be an alien, but don't worry about that unless it comes up. They have to be a Florida resident, but Florida residency is very gray. So there's no cutoff like bright line rule on what a Florida resident is. To qualify for the Medicaid long-term care program, they have to be 65 years of age or older, blind or disabled. And the blind thing, like we've had clients who are in their mid-40s who qualify because they're blind. They can be perfectly functioning in every other capacity, but if they're blind, they can get Medicaid long-term care placement. Oftentimes they have other health issues, because when we get to the number 5, you can see like there's also this physical qualification. But if they're blind and then they also have difficulty doing any of their feeding, bathing, toileting, mobilizing, transferring without assistance, then they can qualify and be young, or if they're disabled. Like a lot of people qualify immediately for Medicaid who get SSI. And they do need to actually be in a facility in order to apply. Okay, quickly, what questions you guys have on that stuff so far?
I don't have any.
Not at the moment.
Okay, so Jenna, do you understand? Like, this is the criteria for Medicaid long-term care, but do you understand the difference between this and the med waiver? Like, what the difference is?
Yeah, I mean, this actually comes down to exactly the clients that I called you about when the guy was from Alaska and they wanted a secondary call with you. So originally they were hell bent on having the individual stay at home, and they adamantly did not want long-term care. So I had called you, you indicated the difference. I told them exactly the med waiver, but there was like criteria and the way, like I went through that. Ultimately, they decided it's too much to stay at home. So they went the long-term care right. And then we did this, the long-term care Medicaid.
I mean, the reality is like everybody wants to stay at home and there's just no money in the HCBS is that program. Although I did read an article today that was sent around about how like the current administration is trying to figure out a way to fund the 820,000 people who are sitting on the wait list across the United States waiting for that to happen. And the pandemic's made it really apparent that it's necessary. Because I mean, do you want to be in a skilled nursing facility or do you want to be at home when everyone has COVID? So, you know, it's I think we're going to see more home-based stuff, and then we're going to need to get more familiar with med waiver. But for right now, like the Medicaid long-term care qualification is super important, and that's what most of our clients are going to be looking to qualify for. Okay, so number 6. Well, okay, so let's talk about number 5 really quick. Cannot do feeding, bathing, toileting, mobilizing, transferring without assistance. That doesn't mean that they can't get their fork from the plate to their mouth. It means they can't go to the grocery store, they can't prepare a meal, they can't clean it up, they can't turn the stove off, you know, all those things that go along with eating, right? Same is true with bathing. Like they may be very able to get a washcloth and put it on their body, but that may not mean that they can get into the shower or the bath. And same idea with toileting. Like if they have occasional incontinence, it's like not all the time, but they just have it occasionally, that's sufficient to meet the criteria. And you know, falls are a pretty, like if people are falling down, they're probably going to qualify. If you have anybody who's falling like more than one time, they're going to meet that criteria for transferring. And then of course you have to apply for everything else before you're going to qualify for Medicaid. Now I have Medicare on here, But really, Medicare doesn't provide coverage for long-term care. We want people to use their 100 days when they've been discharged from the hospital, but really Medicare isn't going to cover long-term care. And VA benefits, obviously, if you were injured during a time of war, you're going to potentially be service connected for long-term care. Now, not every veteran has VA benefits that are going to cover nursing home care. You actually, the very specific criteria of were you in the service and injured during a time of war, that will give you a VA voucher towards to stay either in a VA facility or, they also have vouchers that you can take to private facilities. But you have to use those first before you can get Medicaid. They used to require us to show proof of that you're not qualified. They don't do that now, but if they think you're qualified, they may reject your Medicaid application if they think that you have service-connected benefits. But service-connected benefits are better anyway. Like you're going to get a much, it's going to be better for you to have VA benefits because you're not required to qualify for assets. You don't have to have $2,000 in assets to get those VA benefits. So if they have VA benefits, we want to encourage them to look at that issue and then to use those first because it's required before you get Medicaid, but also you don't have to do all the planning that you would have to do with Medicaid. Does that make sense, you guys? Yeah. Okay. All right. Before you guys get too terribly bored, let's hit on some of the asset issues. All right. Gross income is always going to be 300% of Social Security. So this was just updated. So thank you, Daisy. So 2742 is 300% of SSI benefits. So we very rarely have couples coming in together who need Medicaid at the same time. It's very unusual. It does happen, but mostly we're going to be focused on the 2742 number. And then of course, if you have in excess of that, that's when we use the qualified income trust. Right. And so we know the qualified income trust holds that excess money, and then that gets either paid to the facility. It used to be that we paid it back to Medicaid, but when I explain it to clients, I always, just say okay, this excess income kind of goes into this QIT. Think of it as a separate account. The money goes in, and then that pays directly out to the nursing home. So Daisy, if the nursing home was going to be, being paid by Medicaid, let's just say the nursing home is being paid by Medicaid $7,500 a month, and you have $1,000 more than 2742. So I have $3,742 coming in as income. Medicaid is going to require us to put $1,000 and all the other income into the QIT. And then we're going to basically write a check to the facility for not just the 2742, which is the qualified income amount, but we're also going to send another check for $1,000 minus $130. That's the personal needs allowance that the person's allowed to keep. So basically all your income goes to the facility, and then the facility is going to be paid $1,000 less by Medicaid. So if Medicaid was paying them $6,500 or $7,500, then Medicaid is going to be paying them $5,500 because they're crediting back that $1,000 from the QIT. Does that make sense, you guys?
Yeah. So when you were referring to the $1,000, that's just what over for their amount, whatever it may be over the 2742. Okay.
So let's say I'm getting a pension and I'm getting Social Security benefits, and I'm also getting money from my retirement. And when we add all those three numbers together, it's equaling $1,000 more than 2742, $2,742. So I'm not qualified for Medicaid because Medicaid says you can't have income that exceeds 2742. So then, I'm in trouble because I make more money than that. They allow us to use the QIT, the qualified income trust, for any overage. So that $1,000 can then just be paid directly to the facility, and we can get our person qualified who exceeds the income amount that Medicaid has established. And, you guys remember, the cost of nursing home care is like $13,000 or $14,000 a month. So even though you might have $3,700 a month, you're not going to be able to afford nursing home. Okay. Does that make sense, Daisy?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Okay. Amber, were you going to say
And
something?
just to make sure I understand, so when they have the QIT set up and they have an excess amount,
Yes.
you would deposit all of the income, including what the 2742 plus the excess into the QIT, and then the QIT just writes a check back for the difference, or for the 20 for the
Right. So if our trustee is, let's say it's the daughter, who's also the agent under power of attorney. Every month, she's going to write a check out to the facility
Mhm.
for the total income less $130, because you're allowed to keep $130 every month. And the rest of it is going to either go, and to make it a little more complicated, if you also have a supplemental insurance policy, the QIT can pay that. Then the balance is going to be paid to the facility.
Like essentially
Instructions?
everything but 130, no matter what, is staying. Like you're not seeing that money again.
Except supplemental insurance.
Right.
Yeah, which when we apply, so Kimmy Bush will always say, like, when we apply, give me all your supplemental insurance money, and then that's going to go to the facility. Okay, let me make this a little more complicated. Daisy, close your ears, because this is going to blow your mind, and I don't want you to get sideways. Okay.
My mind's allowed to be blown.
Okay. Yes, Amber's, yours is, and so is Jenna's. When there's an outstanding bill that's medical, so when there's an outstanding medical bill, okay, so that may mean the facility that you're in, like we didn't get to the client until they've not paid their bill for 2 months. And so let's just say they have a $30,000 bill with nursing home, right? But the nursing home has been like, well, we're just gonna be okay with it. Maybe they can get us paid at some point in the future. And so we have this $30,000 bill at the nursing home. We can use something called UMED. UMED. When we apply for Medicaid. Okay. And what UMED does is it captures the invoice. So Kimmy's going to ask for the invoice, what is owed to the facility. And then Kimmy's going to check this box on the application that says, we have an unreimbursed medical expense that needs to be applied before the facility is going to collect the overage from the QIT. So if it's $30,000, and let's just say hypothetically that our client is $4,000 over the QIT value, the like maximum income. All right. So let's say they're making $6,700. That $4,000 a month is going to go into the QIT, and then it's going to go directly to the nursing home to pay that outstanding medical bill. So there's a strategy that you can use when there's a big fat unpaid medical expense out there. It could be a doctor, it could be any unreimbursed medical expense, that then you can use the QIT money to pay that debt off. And technically it's supposed to be paid off that way within 6 months. But we have seen that Medicaid really lets that bill continue to be paid. And what that means basically is that Medicaid is not going to reduce the amount that they pay to the facility during that time that that bill is being paid through UMED. Now it has to be approved, right? Like Medicaid has to approve that when you apply. But once that approval is done, then you're going to continue to pay your income to the facility, but then you're also going to pay down that debt. And we've seen it, them let us pay it down over like a year. Actually, I've never seen them cut off the payment until it's fully paid. So UMED is another strategy to pay off an outstanding medical bill. Now, Kimmy has to be told about that, or whoever's doing the application has to be informed, and that invoice has to go with the application. So, we want to take care of facilities and make sure that they don't go bankrupt. So it's good to have them be paid back if they have a unreimbursed debt. But the other nice thing that I tell clients is like, they're like, oh no, we have this outstanding bill with the facility. And I say, don't worry about it. We're going to ask Kimmy to pay it back when we apply. So then they feel better. And then we can also tell the facility that, like, hey, we're going to pay your debt by using UMED to do it. Okay.
I think I'm confused. Can I clarify a point?
Sure, go for it.
So when you say, like, because we had clarified that you put all of your money into the QIT and then a check gets sent out. So I think I'm just a little confused. When you say income, is that just like the excess of the 2742, or I'm confused on how much? So you put all of your income into the QIT, and then what do you take out to the facility versus what do you keep in the QIT?
$130.
$130.
Just
Everything else-
130, and then everything else goes to the facility. Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yep. Okay. So no more than $2,000 in countable resources. Of course, we have strategies for like eliminating amounts that are over that turning them into exempt assets. This is a new number. It used to be like 140,000, and now the CSRA, or the Community Spouse Resource Allowance, is 148,000. That's the amount of money that our spouse who lives in the community can keep. So if you are, the community spouse, you are healthy and you can live independently, you are allowed to keep up to $148,000 in assets. So that can mean, and you want to count the non-exempt assets. So that's not your homestead. Your homestead doesn't count. Your cars don't. We're talking about things like, an investment account, because remember, retirement assets don't count either, as long as you're taking only required minimum distributions. But you can have up to $100,000 and almost $150,000 of your own money as the community spouse, but it needs to be in your own name. If that makes sense. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah. So if a spouse is like in good health, then you don't really have to worry about like moving your assets and stuff.
Well, if the spouse is in good health, you still have to title it in that spouse's name. So let's say John is in the facility and Jane is out in her house. And John has $140,000 in his name. We'd still have to move that money into the spouse's name that's living in the community in order for Jane to keep that as her community spouse resource allowance. But if she exceeds that amount, if she has assets that exceed the 148, then we have to do other planning for those assets, which could include like a single payer annuity or rental income producing property, or we could think about doing a personal services contract to shelter those assets.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. The one thing that the community spouse scenario was actually a big question mark for me. And I think it might've been last week, I actually asked Sandy about it. Yeah. And one of the interesting things to me was that, yes, that's how we like do our analysis, but the community spouse gets another attorney.
Only if you're doing court ordered support.
Oh.
Okay. So that's a different issue. Okay. Well, let's talk about that while we're thinking about it. So if we're going to do a court ordered support order, so this is going to get in the weeds a little bit, Daisy, and don't get overwhelmed. So plug your ears on this one, because this is very high lawyer. You don't need to be keeping all this information. It's too much. Okay. So let's say that the husband, John, is the primary breadwinner. He's been the one throughout their lives to create stream. And so all of the income is coming to John, and Jane has like $100 in Social Security income coming in, or maybe she's not collecting any, we don't know. So if that's the case, then when John goes into the facility, all his income is going to go into the QIT. We can carve out some community spouse money, which we're going to talk about the CSIA, the community spouse income allowance in just a second. But let's just say that community spouse income allowance is not enough for them, and he's a high income earner. We can go to court and get something called a court ordered support order in order for us to ask a judge to say, look, we know that John is going into the facility, she's staying out, and she needs his income to support herself. And then we have a stipulated order entered by all the parties, including John, including Jane, but John needs his own attorney and Jane needs her own attorney to enter into that kind of stipulated agreement. Now, sometimes John may not be capacitated to do that. So then we have Jane operate as a durable power of attorney to do that, court-ordered support order. And sometimes as well, we might skip Jane to go to another agent under power of attorney to, so that there's not such a big conflict, to be, kind of entering into those agreements with someone other than Jane entering into it with herself. So we want to make sure that everybody understands that when he's in the facility, his income is going to be going to Jane. And so we can use court-ordered support for that. But it's unusual that we have to do that, Jenna. They're rare. It's usually when there's a big income earner spouse going into the facility and the community spouse is much younger, and we need to do that. But we can also do quadros. So if there's like a big retirement asset and we realize that he's not long for this world and she really needs his income, then we can also do like a court order to like basically give his retirement to her who's in the community. That's nothing to do with the court ordered support orders. Does that make sense?
Yes. That was the piece that I was actually missing, I think.
Yeah, because we don't usually do them. I mean, we do them
Right.
when we need to, but it requires the right facts coming in. Okay, I'm just going to go through one more thing, you guys, and then I don't want to overwhelm. We're just going to leave it just the first big chunk of information. Okay.
My phone here is dying, so I'm just trying to find a plug. So if I'm gonna just do that.
We're just going to go over community spouse income allowance. Okay. Community spouse income allowance. The community spouse can receive certain money from institutionalized spouse, and it's a calculation. And I'll be perfectly honest, you guys, I let Kimmy do the calculation. She knows how to request it. She does the calculation and we don't even really worry about it. When we send the couple to Kimmy to do the application, she does that calculation for them. And we try and get the highest amount to be retained with the community spouse, but that's something that she takes charge of and runs the calculation. But the portion which the spouse is permitted to retain, there's a calculation that's done by Medicaid basically, and the minimum allowance is 2289, but the maximum is 3716. And so that's starting on January 1st, I think. And then also there's this excess shelter allowance, which, normally we're going to get the maximum of that. And that's $687 per month that we're allowed to also carve out. So Amber, back to your question about what goes into the QIT. So let's say, John goes into the facility and $6,000 is going into the QIT. From there, we're going to carve out the community spouse income allowance. And we're also potentially going to carve out the shelter, the excess shelter allowance. And then what's left is going to pay for your supplemental insurance policy. And then $130 for the that you get to retain as your personal needs allowance. And then the balance is going to go to the facility. And Medicaid's going to tell you these are the numbers that have to be paid. And sometimes their calculations are wrong or off by a few dollars. And so we have to kind of really look at the numbers and make sure that they add up. So that's it. And you guys can see the excess shelter determination is down there at the bottom. And again, I just let Kimmy do it. But yeah, that's, if we had to do it ourselves, that's how we would calculate it.
Cool.
Okay. That's it. That's all. I'm gonna stop recording now, unless anybody has any more questions. Okay. Are you sure?